Hi, everyone. This is Curtis. And for this week, we are bringing you a good faith classic that is triggered by the fact that it's the fall. And many of us who are parents have sent or dropped off or have heard back from our kids who have gone to college. And I thought this would be a great time for us to bring back a good faith classic of our conversation with Meghan Sullivan on the nature of college, God, and the good life. It's a really fun conversation. I hope you'll enjoy it. Yes, Meghan Sullivan is our guest and a longtime friend of mine. And let me just say, I wanted to talk about this topic of sending our kids or ourselves, if you're a college listener, going back to school. I just dropped off one of my daughters to her freshman year. And as I was leaving, I was pondering this question: what do I really hope for her? Like, what is my sort of my highest hope that she will experience in her 4 years of college? And I realized it was like, I hope she finds a professor that helps her ask the big questions of life. And I thought, well, who would be an example of such a professor? And that's when I thought Meghan Sullivan. So Meghan Sullivan is the Wilsey Family Collegiate Professor of Philosophy at the University of Notre Dame. She also serves as the director of the Institute of Advanced Study, which is one of their primary think tanks at Notre Dame. And this is, I guess, her unofficial title of being, this is probably going to cause problems for her on campus, but as let's say, one of the most popular professors at the university, because she teaches a course that she created called God and the Good Life. God and the Good Life, which is one of, or if not the most popular class at Notre Dame. I got to know Meghan because I started about 12 years ago a program called Veritas Riff with our good friends Andy Crouch and Michael Lindsay and our partners at the Veritas Forum. And it was called Veritas Riff. And it was a program that trained Christian academics, especially at secular or sort of, quasi-secular schools, how to become public intellectuals, how to get their ideas out to the public. And one of our star fellows that went through Veritas Riff, gosh, it was probably, I don't even know, 8 years ago or something like that, was Meghan Sullivan. And I've since gotten to know her better and become friends with her. So Meghan, welcome to Good Faith Podcast.
Oh my gosh, I am so excited to be with you guys and to be unpacking what is going on with all of this back to school stuff this week.
Real quick, have you guys gone back to school at Notre Dame? And if so, what has it been like for you these weeks?
Oh, Curtis and David, we are back with a vengeance. It's funny because the last 2 years of back to school have been so strange at Notre Dame because of all of the COVID obstacles. And so this is definitely the first year in a while, knock wood, where it's felt like a totally normal, utterly insane back to school weekend. And so our students moved in last weekend. Last Friday night, I got to go to dinner with about 100 parents and was the speaker at a dinner. And we were talking about what a gift it is to be able to give a young person just the opportunity of what will happen for them in the next 4 years here. And that's true at other colleges as well. But I walked home to my car at 9:30 that night, and there were at least 10 crying parents walking out of the building with me. And I was like, oh, the emotions are flowing this year. And then I came in at 8 a.m. on Saturday to give what Notre Dame calls a first lecture. It's kind of like an opening academic lecture to get all the new freshmen excited about the new year. And sure enough, a lot of really, really excited freshmen, and I think 10 tearful eyes of like just thinking about what this all meant and processing all the feelings of being back. And so we started off with tears, and this week it seems to be just like full-blown, unadulterated, platonic form of college everywhere, all at once.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk a little bit about how important of a event and practice this is of sending or dropping our kids off to school, or if you're a kid arriving at school in college, because it seems to me that in our increasingly fractured society, that sending kids off to college is one of the still widely shared cultural practices, right? Like, now, not everyone goes to college, or not everyone should go to college, but it's one of the few things that across all political, cultural, geographic divides is still held up commonly as a good thing, as an aspiration, right? And we all share, like, yes, that's something we should aspire to. And, there's 20 million college students every year in the US. 12 million of them are full-time, which means that experience that you just described, Megan, there's probably about 4 million families in these next few weeks, or these recent few weeks, that are dropping their kids off to college for the first time, right? So it's one of our few common lived cultural experiences that we share as society. And it got me thinking, why are we all doing this? Like, why are we all doing this? And yes, the most immediate answer is there's some instrumental purpose to this. Like, yes, we believe sending our kids to college will help them get better jobs, get better career options. So instrumentally, professionally, there's some goal here. But there clearly is something else going on. And you can tell that there's something going on precisely by the tears that you experience, right? That there is something more visceral, more emotional than just I'm instrumentally, moving my kid one step further down. And I think what that gets to is the difference between instrumental aims and formational aims. That the core of the emotion that I experienced, and that I think your parents experienced, is that college, they sense the experience of going to college, it's not just purely instrumental. It's meant to be formational. It's a rite of passage. It marks a key step of their transition and formation into adulthood. And that's profound. Like, almost every culture has that, right? And often it has some aspect of that rite of passage is the leaving of home to go somewhere else. You just think of like Native American tribes where the young men go on a vision quest out into the desert, or ancient Sparta sends their young men to Agoge, which is sort of like a boot camp, right? For our Western modern society, it's going to college at least as an aspirational sense. Again, not everyone goes to college, not everyone should go to college, but it's nevertheless still held up as this sort of kind of an aspirational view of what a rite of passage is like. And so the question I have to ask you, Megan, is like, how is college forming our youth now? Like, what is that experience really like? And in particular, because you're a professor of philosophy, what's the role of philosophy in that process of formation? Because philosophy is one of the most least seemingly instrumental of the majors. You guys make your living by being formational. So pull us together for how is college still forming our youth today, and unpack where philosophy fits in all of this?
Yeah, or maybe I could start with this question of just how is this back to school week philosophically different from other weeks, or why is this the kind of thing that we cry over? And then we'll move into like just what even is philosophy, or how is philosophy going to play a role in what's happening? Because I think your first question, your lead up question, Curtis, is one I've been thinking about a lot over the last few weeks. I think a little bit of unnecessary autobiography. I'm redoing my house right now. It is a catastrophe. I have painters and floor installing contractors in my house at all hours of the day. And what I'm finding myself
David, does this sound
doing,
familiar? Does this sound like a familiar experience, David?
Oh God!
In my life, yeah, it's been my life.
There's no surface in my house right now that's not covered in glue.
I need a trigger warning, Megan. I need a
No.
trigger warning.
Well, so David, so you can empathize with this. Look, if you are doing a huge project like transforming your house, you have all of these individual people you contract with, or maybe one major contractor that manages all the workers, and you have an expectation, I'm going to give X amount of money, a considerable sum of money, a sum of money that rivals college tuition, to these contractors, and in return, I predict I'm going to get a floor by Labor Day. And if the floor is not exactly what I expected, I'm going to fight with the contractor about it and haggle about the price. But it's all very transactional. Everybody knows what's meant to happen at the end. It's very controlled. We all know how we are treating each other, which is primarily as floor delivery person and financier of floor company. And that's how the arrangement for this big project works. I think some folks, certainly like some media outlets like to think of higher education in those kinds of transactional terms. So the college professors are the floor installation, your kid is the house, and you're the financier, and we're going to haggle over the best deal. And then 4 years later, you're hopefully going to get a predictable outcome for this young person as a result of your investment. And college is so expensive, like doing a major home renovation, that a smart consumer better really understand how this is going to get paid for and what's going to happen when you undertake it. But I don't think that providing a college education for a young person is merely transactional in that way. And I think that's what captures why this weekend feels so sacred for so many families, low income and high income families. And I think that it's because there's an economy in higher education, but it's not this simple transactional economy. It's much more of what I would think of as a philosopher as a gift economy. So I had the privilege of putting my youngest brother through college. He went to Brown. He's a communist, but similar kind of price points to Notre Dame. He got a generous financial aid package from Brown, but I also paid a lot more than my down payment on my house for that kid's education. And here are some things that make it pretty, like providing for Connor's education, pretty different than doing a big home renovation. First, I have a pretty decent prediction about what my floor is going to look like at the end of this. When you put your beloved kid into college, young people are highly volatile, changing, forming people. I don't know any parent. I know a lot of parents who are incredibly proud of the 22-year-old, 23-year-old that graduates at the end of this, but almost nobody can predict exactly what's going to happen to that young person in the 4 years of college. It's much more dictated by their calling and experiences and the person that they're becoming during that period. So if you think you're paying money to get a certain kind of product out at the end of it, you have really misunderstood your kid, because that's just really not how this works. And college professors know that as well. We can't even really predict always where a young person's going to end after 14 weeks of a class. I think the second thing is, even though we have big economic aspirations for the young people that we're sending off to college, for sure, we want them to be self-sufficient, happy adults. We want them to be able to form their own families and to support their own children and to be productive members of their communities. But at the same time, as you mentioned, Curtis, a lot of our ambitions for them are far more than economic. Like, we also hope more than anything that they find the person that they might marry, that they develop really great friends, that the world turns on for them, and that they come to life. I mean, we all know people in their 20s who are totally full of life and people in their 20s who are already burnt out. And you hope that the person that you love is in the former category. And we know that the college experience is going to play a big part in that. I think also regardless of the hopes that we have for the young people that we send to college, we don't necessarily think that any of their accomplishments are going to come back to pay us back, right? Like, I think that my floor is going to be worth it because it's going to increase the property value of my home. But why you make a big sacrifice to send your child or your brother or someone you love into a really great college is not so that eventually they'll pay you back with interest the cost of that tuition. I mean, maybe that's true for some families, but I think for more of us, the act of making the sacrifice to help a young person launch in life is deeply meaningful for adults who are able to do that on behalf of a young person, independently of whatever we expect to eventually get back from that investment. Like, it's just wonderful to be able to. There are very few occasions in life where we can give somebody something that has, to your point, Curtis, like intrinsic value, like knowledge and wisdom. And universities don't do all of that. There are many ways to attain knowledge and wisdom in this life, but there are places that have concentrated versions of that are easy to access for 18 and 19-year-olds. And being in the fortunate position of being able to do that for a young person is pretty special. And there are only a few occasions in our life, I think, where we ever have the ability to make that kind of sacrifice. So that's why I think it moves people. It feels sacred to people because they're getting a chance to do that.
Right. So you've brought up many thoughts for me. So let me start with and sort of drill down on something Curtis led with. and that is, how are colleges forming students now? Because they're not all the same. I mean, they're not all the same. One thing that I've noticed is that there are some colleges that have just an extraordinary degree of alumni devotion. And I sometimes talk about the cult of Texas A&M, that there's just something about that place that leads to like this fanaticism around that institution. Much more so than UT Austin, sorry guys. But there's also an enormous love for Notre Dame, just an enormous love. I've never met an alumnus of Notre Dame who doesn't love that institution. So one of the questions that I'd have is, how do you think Notre Dame specifically is forming its students, and how does that compare with what you're seeing how other colleges are forming their students, or what is forming students at other colleges?
Notre Dame was founded by this teeny tiny order of French priests who basically formed right after the French Revolution, when education in France was, to put it mildly, a dumpster fire, with the thought that they felt like called by God himself to rebuild educational institutions, and especially institutions that are formed at young men, obviously, at that time. And so this group, Holy Cross, a lot of people think Notre Dame is Jesuit. If you want to insult a Notre Dame alum, you want to really make them angry, insinuate that they went to a Jesuit college, because it's run by the Congregation of Holy Cross. But Holy Cross, their founder, has this motto, which is still completely unironically repeated across campus today. The idea is that we will not educate the mind at the expense of the heart. So Father Basil Moreau said, when he was sending forth his priests to rebuild these French high schools, and eventually the priests that would come found Notre Dame in the 1800s, we will not educate the mind at the expense of the heart, and that both of those have to go hand in hand. And that is pretty radical. I mean, as a philosopher, as a Catholic, I'm very moved by that vision of education, but as a philosopher, I've got some questions. Question one, and I think other universities very well might have different approaches to whether they think this is a good rallying cry for a university. What does it mean to educate somebody's heart? I mean, you might think that people's emotions, their desires, their loves, these are all deeply personal features of a young adult, and they're the kinds of things that we form on our own, or maybe with the help of our friends and family, but they're not the kinds of things that you can be educated into any more than we think it's a good idea to brainwash young adults to become excellent communists, or indoctrinate them in into some other ideology. And so Notre Dame is already taking a stand on this idea that something can happen in a classroom and in an educational context that will not only give you more skills and information, but will also change, potentially rewire, develop what you love and what you care about and how you appreciate and see the world. And I think something that, people that don't like Notre Dame, like Michigan people, might say that these alums that you're meeting who are totally fanatical have just been kind of brainwashed about this special way of life that they've gotten to enter into together over their 4 years here. But I think for Catholic colleges and for Notre Dame specifically, there's this idea that young adults spend this time in a really intentional community like this, where there's not only microeconomics courses, but there's also weekly masses. There's opportunities for prayer. There are priests everywhere. I led a campus tour yesterday and we saw 10 priests. We were doing a bingo count of how many Holy Cross priests we ran into. There's a lot of visible and indirect examples of questions about why are we ultimately here, and what kinds of things are worth loving and appreciating and attending to, that are just baked into the whole mission of the institution. And I think that some outsiders find that really curious. The folks that were on my tour were finding the priest count really hilarious. But for students that have the opportunity to live here really intentionally for 4 years, it's like a 4-year retreat, which then not for everybody, but for a lot of the leprechaun wearing folks that you're likely to meet later on in adulthood, changed them. People are also very formidable at this stage in life, and it just turns out in the first like real independent adult phase of existence, they were exposed to a lot of ideas and to a place with a really strong intention, and I think that makes a big difference for Notre Dame.
Well, Meghan, I think you were being very polite in just talking about what Notre Dame does and not talking about what other institutions are doing.
I know.
I'm going to yeah, well, except for Michigan. I'm going to be less polite here. As somebody who collects adjunct faculty appointments the way that some other people collect stamps, I've gotten exposed to a lot of different sort of secular institutions that I think are actually far more typical of what is happening in the mainstream of higher ed. And I will just say that I think there is precious little conscious, intentional formation of the heart of what you're describing. That what you're describing at Notre Dame is very rare. I mean, it's happening, I think, at Catholic schools, perhaps, and maybe Christian colleges and universities, at a few very intentional, liberal arts, small liberal arts schools. But the vast majority of higher educational institutions are square in the transactional, instrumental mode of being, because they need that to justify the enormous price tags that they are inflicting on parents like me. And so, and it also strikes me that they actually, ever since the increasing secularization of higher ed, they lack a real vision for what the good life is, for what the good heart even looks like. There is no common consensus or view of what that good, the good heart constitutes. So they're unable to actually intentionally form it. And so if it happens because of the nature of being away from home, and if it might happen accidentally because you get involved with a individual great professor, or you're involved in a great parachurch ministry. Shout out to InterVarsity, my former crew, or a Catholic, sort of a campus ministry of some sort. But as a whole, I would argue that higher ed as an institution is quite adrift in its at least as an intentional formation of the heart. And so that's partly why I so much wanted to talk with you and introduce you to our listeners, because you not only are at an institution that is intentional about that, but you've carried out your intentions in the form of an actual course that is incredibly formative, not just for an individual student, but like for the entire student body. So tell us about this course, God in the Good Life. What is it? Why did you start it? What does it try to accomplish? Give us the picture here.
Sure. So I've been at Notre Dame I'm starting my 12th year, just long enough so I got to do like a little bit of math to remember how long I've been here. And I went up for tenure early when I was an assistant professor, so I got tenure at the end of my 4th year, and I'd gone away to Singapore on sabbatical, like a lot of people do right before they go up for tenure, and that's kind of a big turning point for a college professor. When I was abroad, I was thinking a lot about what my goals would be in this kind of next phase of my career. And I prayed about it. I'm Catholic in my personal life as well, and was really thoughtful about it. And one thing that I realized mattered a lot to me is providing opportunities for students to see the connection between intellectual pursuits like reading Plato and Aristotle and Immanuel Kant and Descartes, and spiritual pursuits like figuring out what the hell kind of person they're going to be. I don't know what your cursing is on this podcast. What
You're
the
good,
heck
Meghan.
kind of person they're going to be? When I was in college, when I was a student at the University of Virginia, a public school with I think a really great record of student formation, which I'm happy to talk about. One of the things that happened for me my second year of college was that I came to faith. I became a member of the Catholic Church. I started asking really profound, important questions that would come to shape what I thought was good in life. And that was partially because of my philosophy courses, sometimes in spite of them. but also just where I was in that phase of life. These questions feel, I think, really alive to 18, 19-year-olds. What am I really going after? How am I really going to shape this life that's still a stem cell, still figuring out what it's going to be? So I felt like I wanted to throw a lot of resources into building like proof of concept that you can have a course that not only satisfies a curriculum requirement and is intellectually pretty serious and demanding, but the results are personal and not just students clearing a bunch of hoops and like mastering the Western canon. And God in the Good Life really started. I got back from sabbatical. I was one of these totally obnoxious, recently tenured professors, the kind that I hate now, who came back and they just cleared the bar and now they think they know everything. And I marched into our dean's office. He's now our provost, John McGreevy, and was in McGreevy's office. And he's like, I know what I want to do after tenure. I'm sure he was hoping it was like write $1 million grant. But I was like, I really want to blow up and reinvent this intro philosophy course, large lecture course, with this idea that the primary learning goal will be for students to spend 14 weeks thinking and writing about how they would articulate the goal of their lives so far. And we would give them little philosophical questions, not little ones, big ones, to guide them along the way. And we'd make them read, we'd prescribe philosophers the way a physician prescribes like medicine, to try to encourage them to deepen the kinds of questions that they're asking. But we'd ask them to write about their life against those philosophies. And at the end of the course, they would produce a document which they'd share with some of their friends, we hope, and with their families. That's their philosophical apology, this idea of like them reasoning about why they're here and what a good life will mean for them. And where, because this is Notre Dame and because it matters a lot to me, where, if at all, God or religious faith would fit into that picture. And my dean, to his credit, was immediately a supporter. He was like, this sounds like exactly the kind of thing that we ought to be doing. Like, this sounds like such a great experiment. And they kind of granted me permission to get really bad teaching evaluations if it failed. And also the promise that they would help champion it if it was successful and was really striking a nerve with the students. And then just like lots of guidance about how to try to build something new. And so we launched that course, worked with some really talented graduate students in our philosophy department here. Some of the most gifted teachers that we have at Notre Dame, I'd suspect anywhere, are actually really young PhD students and assistant professors, people who are still full of energy and willing to experiment. They kind of joined up in the project, and we started with a blank sheet of paper. We're just like, if we wanted to invent a 14-week course that would help a student come up with a provisional answer to these questions, like, how would we use our 28 sessions? And the people can check out the website for the course, God in the Good Life at nd.edu. We put all of our materials online. We immediately developed a big outside audience. A lot of our students would take the course and then their parents would follow along at home on the course webpage, because it just turns out a lot of 40 and 50-year-olds have exactly the same questions that we're inflicting on 18 and 19-year-olds.
Yeah.
Sure.
One thing that we also did was, which at the time seemed like a really radical experiment and turned out to be completely magical. Each section of God in the Good Life has 150 students. I was telling you guys right before we started this call that about a third of the freshman class at Notre Dame is taking some version of God in the Good Life this year, and it's spread really rapidly. It's definitely part of campus culture here. One thing that we did really early on, and we were urged by some consultants who work with caring for young people to try this experiment. They said, replace your graduate student teaching assistants with undergraduates. And we're like, why would we do that? Undergraduates know way less philosophy than graduate students. And graduate students, as I just said, tend to be quite gifted teachers and really enthusiastic. And they were like, trust us, you want to have undergraduates involved in some interesting way with delivering the content of a course on how to care for your soul. And so we thought about this, and we started up this program. We call it God in the Good Life Fellows, where every semester when we finish the big lecture class, we put out a call to the students, and we say, who in our class was really gifted at asking you questions about philosophy this semester. Did you really enjoy having discussions with, and do you feel like really listened to you or just paid attention to you as you were trying to explain yourself? And those students get identified, and we interview them. We do check their grades in the philosophy course, but we pick about 10% of them we pick up, and we make them the discussion leaders for the next group of students that goes through the class, and they lead these weekly small groups.
Wow.
And one of the things that we learned is in this business of trying to not only teach philosophy, but also teach young people how to care for their own souls and each other's souls. One of the most important things that you can do is activate peers and community, and actually make the conversation something that they hear twice a week from somebody with a PhD who's already got their life figured out. But they also hear the same message once a week from somebody who's almost exactly the same age and is only 14 weeks ahead of them on the journey, and who's able to do some of that translational and care work in a way that maybe sometimes for formation we can't. So and it's been really successful.
How are you seeing students transform in the course? What are you seeing? What does to carry our renovation analogy forward? What does the flooring and the sink look like after it's all done? How are they directionally changed?
I got myself into trouble a few years ago because the Chronicle of Higher Education interviewed me about this course, and they asked me this question of, what do you see like as the at the week 14, once students have written these essays about the meaning of their life, are there really common themes? Like, do they all say they're Catholic at the end of the course? Or do they all say they're going to give 80% of their income to charity? The answer is no. That's not what got me in trouble. One of the things that our course is pretty good at Notre Dame, we joke about this on the teaching team, and I'll tell you guys because I'll probably just get in trouble again, is, our students' essays and the outcomes of this 14 weeks of self-examination, the outcomes are as different as the students that we plug into this process.
Right.
And they come to us preformed with values and questions and ideas. They just haven't quite learned how to talk about them yet, or unpack them, or deepen them, or make them authentic. So we get weird essays at the end of this course. And one genre of God and the Good Life essay that we help students write over the course of 14 weeks is what we call the atheist coming out essay. So some of our students, they started college definitely as an atheist, and they have just never had the language to talk to anybody they care about their skepticism about religion. Maybe they were brought up in a Catholic tradition or a different religious tradition, and they've just never known how to tell people what they're thinking. And then they come into God and the Good Life. We read some Nietzsche, we read Aquinas, we read a lot of Aristotle. And we talk with these students, and we care for them, and we help them make their questions a little bit more precise, and we help them think a little bit about what's been going on in their life so far that's made this question or this view feel really urgent to them. They write the first draft of this apology essay right before Thanksgiving, so then we send Curtis and David's kids home for Thanksgiving after the first 10 weeks at college with a very thoughtful explanation to their parents about why they're not going to Mass anymore. That's not for all of our students, but it is for some of them. That's what got me in trouble is, of course, the Chronicle is put that as the block quote. But one of the things that we notice is, and I think this is a good thing, very few of our students completely overhaul their worldviews or their idea of who they are or what's really valuable in 14 weeks of intro philosophy. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's a good thing that they've had 18 years of life and people who've cared for them and experiences that they brought into college that we're now helping them elevate and work through and setting them up for what'll hopefully be an adult life of making some big decisions about those commitments. And so we don't usually have students revolutionize their worldview in our class the first semester of college. What happens is they make it more clear and more precise, and some parts of it feel much more real to them than others. And then we set them free at Notre Dame for 6 or 7 more semesters to keep working. A lot of students that we talk to, especially the ones that stay involved in GGL, will keep working on these essays every year or two while they're at Notre Dame. They sometimes come back to us at graduation and share how they've updated various sections or thought about things differently. And that process happens more slowly than happens in just one semester. But what we give them is kind of a language and a framework for realizing you better keep asking questions about what your moral commitments are and what's going to happen after you die and what it means to love other people. And we're always going to be here to keep talking about it with you. When you become alums and you come back for football, we'll have a drunken conversation with you at a tailgate about these same questions. But we've hopefully set them up with like a system that they're going to keep using, and then life and revelation and many other experiences are going to feed into the big moments when they might come change their mind. And just not a lot of those happen their first semester of college, we've discovered.
Meghan, one of the reasons why I went into campus ministry as my first job out of college was that I had my own transformational experience in college, and I wanted to participate in that, kind of like one of your TAs. You know, I wanted to help in a near peer kind of way, people coming after me. But I also realized that this was an incredibly pivotal and strategic place to just invest in for the good of our society, because, you know, I think history tells us if you want to know what our society is going to be like in 25 years, pay attention to what is happening on college campuses right now. Now, again, it's not because everybody who's shaping and important in the world goes to college, but there is just an undeniable sort of formation happening in the college years, not just of the individuals, but of our culture and of our society. And you can't predict for sure where it goes, but you can get some indicators by what is going on the campus now, as far as if you want to know what's going to happen in the future. And so give us a window into that. If you were to look at what's happening on the campus now from your perspective, what hints might that give us about what our future as a society looks like?
So, I mean, the last 2 years of dealing with the COVID crisis and the after effects of this, 2 years of social distancing, 2 years of pretty bitter political polarization in the United States, 2 years where many of the students that we see and many of the adults that serve as the faculty and staff have not been part of intentional communities. Like churches closed, community centers closed. A lot of the organizations that we joined to be part of common goods have just been not functioning. And colleges are one of they're utopia for this. We're meant to be a group of people organized around a very clear high goods. And we were all on Zoom. We were doing it on teleconferencing software for so long that I look around the college campus and think, gosh, we are just still beginning to process the damage that 2 years of loneliness and isolation have done to our individual souls, our sense of happiness and meaning, and also to our ability to come together into intentional groups and understand what it means to be part of a community with a soul and a goal. So I'm sobered by looking around and comparing what even life at the university feels like now compared to what it felt like in 2018, which was maybe optimistic to the point of naivete. And I think that if we're looking ahead to the next 10, 20 years, it's going to be extremely important for faculty and administrators and staff who lead colleges and universities to think seriously about what it means to bring a really scattered community that we kind of took for granted, always recognize something in common. Now they've been kind of scattered to the wind and people are out of practice with being together, to think about what it means to come back together and to really value the core of university life and community life that we had but took for granted, I think, years ago. And now, when I read about folks who want to move courses into hybrid or asynchronous formats, or who don't think that it's incredibly important that students be allowed to form Dungeons and Dragons clubs after hours, or who
Amen
think
to
the world
that.
would.
Amen to that.
You got a big amen from David there.
Yeah.
No. Look, I mean, like, the magic is the whole cloth. It's courses that are led by long-standing faculty members who are very committed to generations of students and excited about teaching students and then teaching their little brothers and sisters and maybe eventually their own children someday. It means campuses where students don't only just come in to get technical training, but they also come to practice living together, even if it's like 4 to 6 people crammed into a dorm room. We want to do it in a way that's safe, and we couldn't do that during COVID. But once the kind of medical crisis clears, we want people to spend a few years living in a really cramped dorm room and sharing a bathroom with 20 other people, and making it work, and forming clubs, and the clubs not working out, and them making poor, hopefully safe decisions in community, so that they become the kind of adults when they're 24, 25, 34, 35, who are addicted to life with other adults and like making life together, and addicted to community life. And if we have this just like hyper individualistic, single serving approach to college, I'm really afraid that we're going to lose one of the last great institutions that teaches us how to be together. And that, it seems like, a major social problem facing us in our adult lives.
So, one question that I have for you, and because I've gone around and I've spoken a lot of colleges over the years and spoken about college an awful lot. And one thing that I have said, and I'm really curious what you think about this. One thing that I have said to folks who, many of them are Christian parents who are really afraid of college, to be honest, is that they think that that's where they're going to go. And 10, 14 weeks later, here comes Junior home from Thanksgiving, and, they've got a nose ring, a tattoo, and they don't believe in God anymore, right?
And they've written an essay about it. We helped them. We made it better.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing that I have noticed is I feel like a lot of folks, especially in the Christian community, overthink the intellectual preparation for college. In other words, prepare for an answer when somebody says, I don't believe, in God. Here's your answer. Or when a professor is an atheist, here's your answer. And underprepare students for the emotional and relational aspect of college. And that's where they're going to really, truly thrive or not thrive. And just really curious about your thought on that angle of approach.
I absolutely agree. I mean, I'd say this to parents of middle school and high schoolers who are just about to run this really challenging gauntlet of trying to figure out college for their young person. Look, the college industrial complex, elite universities like Notre Dame are part of the problem, because the academic gateway to enter into our universities is so narrow and so challenging that you have to spend a lot of time with a young person, getting them really up to speed intellectually to have them possibly gain admittance to one of these really great colleges. But to go back to Basil Moreau, if you're only educating their minds and not educating their hearts, what's going to happen is they're going to get in to Notre Dame or to Brown or to Duke or to Stanford. And then 2 weeks later, they will have this incredible gift given to them, but they're not going to know how to use it. They won't know how to make the kinds of friends that are going to be a key part in them learning anything in these discussion-based seminars that are going to constitute their college life. And they're going to be basket cases as they enter adulthood. They'll be the kind of people who think of themselves as like walking test subjects in an endless system of evaluation schemes, and not as people with creativity and value and potential that's still being figured out. And so to the extent that like parents, Christian parents or parents of any background who love their young person and have big college dreams for them, can spend time helping students, one, just get enough of a sense of themselves to be able to have the confidence to be independent when they get to college, to learn how to take risks, to learn how to talk to themselves when they fail. I think that's really important. And my gosh, the best skill in the universe you can give a young person, especially after what we've been through the last couple of years, is the confidence and discernment to make friends, to discover other people that they love, and to learn how to cultivate those relationships and to deal with those relationships when they're challenging. Because really getting that formational experience in college it's going to be primarily on their shoulders, and they're going to have to put themselves out there, and they're going to have to value those kinds of experiences. There are plenty of ways you can get to an elite college, even one like Notre Dame, and just take tests all the time and study all the time and miss the experience because you don't know even how to look for it. And parents play a key role with middle schoolers and high schoolers in teaching them how to see other people and not just see lines in a resume.
Megan, that's great advice, and I think that's something that myself as a parent, I'm trying to pay attention to. And I know one of the things that is a struggle, at least for some parents, is really letting go, right? Like it's really saying this is a human being, not a product. This is, like you just said, like you opened with, this is a living human being that is not me. And so I cannot treat them as a projection of me. And they're going to have, especially in college, experiences that actually sharpen that sense of differentiation. And one of the things I really try to encourage other peer parents is to really encourage them to treat the college years as a spiritual opportunity for themselves as parents. Because as much as your child is going through this process of differentiating and finding out who they are apart from their parents, not completely separate, but just distinct from their parents, the parent has to go through a parallel, mirroring spiritual growth process that all of us as parents have fused our own egos, dreams, identities into our kids. And part of our own spiritual growth as parents is to really differentiate from them, to say they are not me, and the choices that they make are going to be theirs and not mine. So speak as a philosopher to parents who may be just now dimly grasping, I need to differentiate. There's a growing up I need to do as a parent in this moment that I'm sending my kid away. What philosophical resources can they draw on in this key transition moment for them?
So one of the most talked about topics in ancient Greek philosophy is how difficult it is to switch from the life of action to the life of contemplation. So the life of action is when you're really busy working on things and you've got projects and you're making a difference and you're hustling. And my gosh, if you're a parent for a high school student right now, it is all action all the time. It's soccer on Mondays and debate on Tuesdays, and have you filled out your application, and what are your SAT scores? And you're doing lots of things for your child, oftentimes to your child, and you're a very active participant in this process of launching them on the good life. And that is great. There are various phases in life where we are called to the life of action, and action can feel quite meaningful. But there are other phases in life where you shouldn't be doing things for or to anything or anyone. You really do just need to stop and behold and contemplate and entertain something that's beautiful and good in the universe. And maybe when you're the parent of an infant, there are actually only a couple actions that are relevant. Like it's not, it's sleepless, but you actually just spend a lot of time holding and staring at that young person and trying to figure out what the heck was going on in their mind, and loving them and being astounded by them. And, the activity kicks up a notch as you parent really actively through the grade school years. I have had the opportunity to care for college age people. I've never sent any children to college myself, but for the parents that I witness at Notre Dame, the ones that are getting the most out of this experience are the ones that can take a step back and realize that the active phase of parenting it hasn't gone away, but it's kicked into a lower gear, and that's not a loss. because there's now this opportunity to start working on the next kind of virtue, which is the contemplative side of being a parent, of looking at this like amazing, complex person who you created and love, and now has this whole complex inner life of their own and the capacity to do for themselves and for others. And you just get to like behold them and be surprised by them and love them without doing things to or for them. And that's a holy, sacred kind of love in and of itself. And also, you know, brace yourself, because when they graduate, the odds are they're going to come back and live with you for a little bit, and the high school phase might come back, and this might move in cycles. But I think that the parents that do really well, and especially for freshmen, are the ones that realize, like, all right, I'm getting a chance to practice different parental virtues now that this child is launched. And I now have you were too breathless and busy during those teenage years to really appreciate this person that's part of your life forever now. And this is a chance for you to work on that.
Well, I love that. And let me just chime one additional thought to that. I love the idea of parenting as moving into this contemplative place of contemplating and beholding the beauty and glory that is your child, as well as all the, all ugliness and brokenness that's involved, but really contemplating that deeply. I love that. I would also just put in a plug for contemplating their own lives, because I have noticed in parents, when they hit the empty nest phase, there's this cultural expectation that actually now is the time for you to shift into even more frenzied activity and action. Where will you travel? Where will you, what will you do? What new projects will you do? And so forth. And to me, it always has struck that frenzied activity is actually covering up a need and an invitation from God to actually do that, contemplating not of just of your kid, but of their own lives, and trying to make deeper sense of what does my life now look like? What does my marriage mean now that this common activity, this common project that I've shared with my spouse, we no longer have? Like, it actually exposes kind of some deep questions and some deep gaps, even, that you have to sit with, contemplate, and be willing to be uncomfortable with, to tolerate it some. And I've just seen this strong tendency to, because it is so uncomfortable, because they're so unused to contemplating this deeper questions of what is my life's purpose now? What will I'm nearing death. I've got about 20, 25 years of productive life. What is that? What do I do with these last 20 years? If God willing, I even have them. Because there's this sort of discomfort with asking that question, they just shift into a different kind of activity and not take advantage of this spiritual invitation for contemplation. So I love that. And, if you've got other advice or tools for parents to contemplate their own lives, I mean, maybe they need to take your class like those parents of your undergraduate. But, do you have any other thoughts for how sort of the empty nester parent can move into contemplation of their own lives more?
I think it's really beautiful, Curtis, and I'm curious how you and your wife and your family are navigating this too, right? Being right in the middle of it with this season of back to school. It explains the tears on move-in night for all those parents. It's not just that they're so proud of these young people that are launching, but this palpable sense of loss of a phase of their life that was deeply automatically meaningful. I mean, Aristotle, let's go back to Aristotle. He can fix this for us. Aristotle defines happiness, eudaimonia, flourishing, as like the thing that we're ultimately aiming at in all of our lives. And he says we get easily convinced that eudaimonia are other good things. So really shallow people think eudaimonia is about accumulating money. But actually deeper people mistake eudaimonia for achievements or for relationships, like having really pursuing really meaningful relationships of a certain sort. Being a parent, Aristotle writes a lot about parenthood. They think that is in and of itself happiness, and something that you fully invested yourself in and developed a lot of virtues as a result of working on, you might mistake for being the meaning of your life. And one of the things Aristotle talks to us about is realizing that for these activities, like good activities, like being a parent, like going after career achievement, they're going to end. And whatever happiness is something that's not going to end in that way. So if you have been in hustle mode as a parent for so long that it's just made sense for you to tie up happiness with parenting, that might have made sense for what you needed to succeed in that phase of your life. But now you also need to take a step back and realize it was never true that the entire meaning of your life was just raising this person successfully to age 18. Happiness has always been something much more complete and deep and permanent. And now you have this opportunity to think, all right, like, what are some other pieces of eudaimonia, some other virtues, some other experiences that are going to be relevant to me filling out this picture? So that might be helpful. But I think you're also right, Curtis. Parents should take a beat these next few weeks and process how profound a change this is in their lives. And that's beautiful. And that's also why this is so meaningful, and why parenthood itself and loving other people is so meaningful, is that when the change happens, you have to make meaning out of the change. And you've got to sit back and try to tell that story of what parenthood meant to you. And it's okay to have complex emotions about that. I think that's totally appropriate.
I have a very dear friend. He just dropped off. He's now officially empty nesting. We're the opposite of that, by the way. We now have 3 generations under our roof. So
nice.
My college graduate daughter and her husband moved back in with us between college and grad school with our baby granddaughter. And then my son is taking,
who is amazingly cute, by the way, and is something to
cute.
behold, truly
Amazingly
behold.
Cute. And then my son is taking a short break from college, so he's home. And then my youngest is 14, so of course she's home.
Yeah.
And so we have a multi-generational. We're back like being the Waltons, so it's a totally different experience. But a dear friend of mine just became an empty nester, a few days ago, and he sent a message. We talk on this social media app, Marco Polo, where you record video messages to each other, and we have a friend group from college. And he said, "I don't know what I'm going to do now." And I thought that was unbelievably poignant to hear. And I think that that's where so many parents are, because they've sort of been child rearing corporation, child raising LLC, like that's what they've done. And then this is this moment, and it really strikes me as a sense of, to tie in another thread that we've been talking about, this necessity of belonging, of the sense of belonging in a community, is that you have one community disrupted, the community of your family, and other communities created, these communities of these new friends. And it's a remarkable period of transition for everyone involved. And one thing that I'm really fascinated by is how much you've emphasized this community, these friendships.
Yeah.
Do you talk, and I could go on forever. I'm about to write about some new research about belonging and the loss of belonging being tied to all kinds of social ills. I mean, we're not talking just individual loneliness and anxiety and depression. We're talking about being attracted to authoritarianism, being driven away from respect for all kinds of things. So when you're talking about forming these relationships in college and you're prioritizing that, how are you talking to your students about forming and critically nurturing these, not just in their 4 years, but after this 4 years?
Yeah, so I actually, we teach about friendship in God and the Good Life. We do a unit on it. It usually lasts like 3 class periods when we're talking about the moral and meaningful life. Almost every major philosopher writes at length about friendship. And this shows you not only how important this topic is, but how much pathos smart people have about whether or not they're doing a good job at managing what turn out to be these really central relationships. I was thinking about this morning because I was reading Immanuel Kant, very famous Enlightenment philosopher, also famously like a bit of a curmudgeon. Kant, a lot of people don't realize this, spends a lot of time on really detailed advice for making friends, like how to throw a dinner party, and how do you know if your dinner party's going well, and what kinds of conversation topics should we plan for the dinner party, and then also some big picture questions, like how do you know when you need to get rid of a friend relationship is actually harming you. Or how do you know when you're the wrong actor in a relationship, or when you're wrong to hold somebody in contempt? He writes a lot about sometimes you hate somebody and it's actually destroying you. Philosophers write about this so much, I think, because it's such a core part of who we are as humans, and it's also one of the surest paths to either happiness or misery in our lives. So if you're going to spend a lot of your firepower giving people advice about pursuing a good life, this is a good place to dwell. There was tons of evidence from social psychology and from sociology that the quality of relationships determines how long you live, how much money you make. Raj Chetty at Harvard has this really fascinating study that just came out, shows friendship is one of the key drivers of economic mobility. If you want to figure out whether somebody living in a particular community is likely to be able to move from a low income situation to a middle income situation, look at how easy it is for them to make friends with middle income people in their schools or in their churches. So it's like one of these seemingly essential, really core ingredients of the good life. And I am totally with you, David. We have hit some unprecedented challenges all at once in our capacity to have these kinds of friendships or to really understand them. I'm predicting, I hope that actually there'll be a huge resurgence of really interesting philosophy about friendship, just because we've been in crisis for so long, and philosophers usually do their best work right when things are really falling apart. Pope Francis has written, his last encyclical was called Fratelli Tutti, and it was all about friendship and tying it to exactly these questions you're talking about. If we can't figure out how to be friends with people who are different to us, we are going to have an impossible time continuing democratic life, and we're going to have an impossible time continuing to access the great goods of our own lives, of family life and community life. And he gives a fair bit of advice based on the parable of the Good Samaritan. But I think this is something that we all ought to be thinking and reading quite a bit about, and there's opportunities for theology and philosophy to help.
Well, Megan, that just makes me think about how grateful I am that we became friends those many years ago and are continuing to be friends, and that you're getting to be part of our circle of friends here at the Good Faith podcast. So thank you for that. And we also want to give you a chance to plug your book where you describe the Good Faith, the Good Life course. So tell us and tell us where the book is, how they can get it, and why they should read it.
Gosh, I'm so horrible at selling books. If I'd been better at this, I would have mentioned it like 4 times already. So, Good Faith listeners, if you love this podcast, I guarantee you will love a book that me and my fellow philosophy professor Paul Blaschko put out this past January. It's called The Good Life Method, and it's inspired by the philosophers and the questions and stories that we share with our students in our God and the Good Life course. But if you've never taken a philosophy course, if it's been a while, if you took philosophy in college and you hated it, which is true of a lot of people I talk to, give this book a shot. This is the book for you, because it's very approachable, and each chapter takes up a different question that faces us in our pursuit of happiness. So how do we integrate money into our lives? How do we love other people? How do we take responsibility when we screw up? Is there a God? Should you write your atheist coming out essay? What are you going to do about the fact that people you love will die? All of the big existential questions, and some of the really small ones too. What should you do about Facebook? We pose the question. We introduce you to some heavyweight philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, Elizabeth Anscombe, Aquinas. But we show you how that philosopher has some ideas which you can understand without even getting a PhD. That's why these guys are timeless. Their ideas are actually pretty approachable. Introduce you to the ideas, and then give you some tips for how to start to tell a more interesting story about how you're reasoning through these problems. We also, like we do with our students, encourage you to then go pick philosophical fights with your loved ones, with your friends on the Marco Polo app. And just philosophy is a team sport, and it's an interactive activity. So we also give you ways to start just adding these philosophical conversations back into the life you have with your family members and your friends. So we're very proud of the book, and we think it's also a great way to understand the ethos and values and love that we have for our students and our community here at Notre Dame. But we're also so happy when other people read it and come up with questions and feel like they kind of identify a little bit more with these goals and hopefully want to be part of this community with us. So wherever fine books are sold, The Good Life Method, Meghan Sullivan and Paul Blaschko, coming out in paperback in January.
Outstanding. Well, we'll put a link in the show notes.
Thank you.
If you go to the dispatch.com and look at the show notes, or wherever you get your podcast, you can see it in the show notes. So thank you so much for joining us. This has been really just a wonderful conversation. Really appreciate you joining us, and really appreciate the discussion of connection. It's just, the longer we walk through this polarized, bitter, angry time, the more convinced I am that a lot of it is about a loss of connection. So Thank you very, very much. Listeners, thank you as always. Thanks for hanging with us every week. And please go rate us where you get your podcasts. Please go subscribe where you get your podcasts. Please check out Curtis's work, redeemingbabel.org, and please check out my work at thedispatch.com. And like I said, we're going to have in the show notes the link to Professor Sullivan's book. Thank you again, and we will be back next week.